Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SCORE Fairfield County's live webinar on Time Management Part 3, Client Handling and Management. And before we start today, I'd just like to apologize to those of you who were on last Tuesday when we had technical difficulties with our webinar service provider, and we have rescheduled for today. And I'm Bob Hogan, the webinar coordinator and a business mentor here at SCORE, and I'll be your host. And our presenter today is Cliff Ennico. More about Cliff in just a moment, but first some brief information on SCORE. SCORE is a national organization with over 320 chapters across the country and 11,000 volunteers. Locally here at SCORE Fairfield County, we have over 100 volunteers with a wide range of expertise by industry, process, subject matter, and we offer 3 primary value-added services to small business owners. We offer one-on-one counseling, either face-to-face, by telephone, email, or Skype. We offer over 150 educational workshops and webinars during the year, and we also offer extensive resources on our website, including access to a network of subject experts. Our next webinar will be next Tuesday when Susan Catalano and Robert Clark will present Navigating the Digital Marketing Maze, and you can find more specifics on our website at fairfieldcounty.score.org. We have set aside time for Q&A at the end of Cliff's presentation today, so if you have a question, please use the chat feature at any time during the presentation. It's in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And again, you can put those questions in at any time during the presentation. We will end sharply at 1 o'clock, and the session is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be available on our website within the next couple of days. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Cliff Ennico. Cliff is a frequent speaker here with SCORE, and he's a nationally recognized small business, legal, and tax expert. His weekly advice column, Succeeding in Business, is syndicated nationally and appears in dozens of major newspapers and small business websites across North America. An attorney and small business consultant based in Fairfield, Connecticut, Cliff has helped over 15,000 businesses during his 36-year career and is the author of 16 books, his most recent being The Crowdfunding Handbook. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Cliff. Cliff, all yours.
Great, Bob. Thanks very much, and welcome to everyone to today's program, which you'll see is a Part 3. This is the third and final part of a 3-part series that I've been doing for SCORE on time management. Part 1 was on managing your time and getting control of your time in your life. Part 2, which we did a couple of months ago, was on delegation, how to delegate, who do you delegate to, how to find someone to delegate to when it's just you and your dog and your cat, how you do that. And this is Part 3, which is client handling and management. When you run a service business of any kind, and as a lawyer I am the prime candidate for this, time management becomes the most important thing you do in a given day. At any given time, I'm working for 20, 30 clients, and trying to keep them all happy is a little bit like that old circus act where the guy balances the china plates on top of bamboo poles. You've got 30 plates spinning at one point on bamboo poles, and the trick is to look for the ones that are starting to wobble a little bit. You want to get those short up so that they're spinning properly. Client handling and management is a key part of the time management process, and it's what we're going to be talking about today. So before we get any further, these are the disclaimers. If you ever doubted that I was a lawyer, here we are. Obviously, the key thing is, while I do these programs for SCORE, I am not an employee of SCORE. I'm not part of the SCORE organization, so anything that I say here is strictly my own views and doesn't represent any official policy of SCORE or the SBA or anybody else. But the more important disclaimer here is the second one. While we will be getting into some legal and tax stuff in this program, especially toward the end, and I'm sure some of you have questions of a legal or tax nature that I will try to answer on this program, there's a very big difference between giving legal information and giving legal advice. I don't know anybody on this call well enough to be able to say this is what you should do in a particular instance. So while I'm certainly happy to say this is what the law says, this is what most people will do, I cannot really give you one-on-one legal advice. That is something that can only be done by a lawyer or accountant or tax advisor that is licensed to practice in the state where you live. So with that out of the way, let's begin. Let's talk about clients here. Here are 4 inconvenient truths about clients, with apologies to Al Gore. These are 4 things about clients that drive you nuts when you run any kind of a business of your own. Number 1, you can't run a business without them. Can't live with them, can't live without them. Bottom line. You must have clients in order to survive in a business. A business without customers is called a hobby. Now, the IRS has a much more technical definition that they use to define a hobby, but to me, this is good enough. Anything that you do that is fun and enjoyable to do, but that nobody pays you to do, is a hobby, as far as I'm concerned. The big difference between a hobby and a business is, in a business, people pay you to do the thing, whatever it is, and those people are called customers or clients. And let's face it, business would be tons more fun without them. We lawyers actually have a saying, and it's been around for at least 100 years. The profession of law would be so much darn fun if it weren't for the clients. If it weren't for that. I mean, the study of law is intellectually fascinating. It absolutely is. The trouble is, clients don't want to pay for all that research and all that fun research that you do, coming up with new theories for things. They only want to pay for certain specific things, and it's usually the most boring thing in the world that they want you to do. Business would be a lot more fun without them. And number 2, they are your boss. Okay, this is one of the hardest things. Whenever I meet a first-time entrepreneur, inevitably, at some point in the conversation, they'll say, Cliff, I want to really run my own business because I want to be my own boss. I'm tired of working for other people. I want to be my own boss. And I have to kind of burst their bubble there a little bit, because when you run your own business, even as a solo, you still have a boss. You do. The only difference is that the boss is no longer working in the same office that you are. He doesn't occupy the cubicle next door. Your boss is your customer. You don't do what you want to do. You do what the customer wants you to do. And I hate to burst people's bubbles. No one pays you to do stuff that is fun or interesting. And this applies to me. I am not exempt from these rules at all. The same rules apply to me as apply to anybody else. People do not hire lawyers to do things that are fun and interesting. I mean, one of my famous lines is, no one ever calls their attorney when they're having a nice day. Okay, people do not do that. Okay, most of the things that people ask me to do are drafting contracts or legal correspondence, letters threatening to sue someone because a customer isn't paying them on time or something like that. Okay, how many of you think that drafting legal documents is fun or interesting? It isn't. It's dull. It's boring. It's technical as hell. So it's all I can do to keep awake sometimes drafting some of these things. And also it's dangerous too. If I make a mistake, if I say thou shalt when it really is thou shalt not, I could very easily get sued for malpractice. My customer could lose their deal, their business. There's a lot at stake. When I'm drafting a contract for a client, I got one hand on my malpractice insurance policy as I'm doing that job. It's scary, and that's why people pay me to do that, because they don't want to do that themselves. They're frightened, they're scared, or maybe they just don't want to be bored out of their minds. They are more than willing to pay me a very handsome fee indeed to take that pressure off their shoulders. In a service business especially, people only pay you for the jobs that they themselves don't want to do, and they're not going to be the most fun jobs in the world either. That's how a service business makes money. Also, you sometimes disagree with your customers' choices. Your clients sometimes will want you to do things that they shouldn't do or they shouldn't want to do. You'll listen to them sometimes and you say, what, they want to do that? They're out of their freaking minds. Why do they want to do that? Unless, of course, don't get me wrong, if a client asks you to do something illegal or unethical, you don't do it. End of story. But short of that, there are a lot of things where the clients are saying, well, geez, this is going to be a real problem. Why do you want to do this yourself? You're spending. I spend a lot of my time, covering my rear end, making sure that when a client wants to take a course of action that I disagree with, that I document the fact that I disagreed with them. I advised you, this little certified, I did tell you that there was this other path open to you. You decided not to take it. Because inevitably what happens is when they take the path and it ends up being the disaster we all thought it would be, they're all going to come back and say, Cliff, why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you protect me? And I have to have protection against that. That's not a fun part of dealing with clients, but it's a very real part. Sometimes you don't like your clients. too. I mean, hopefully that's not a chronic problem in your business. But there are some clients that, frankly, to be honest with you, I just don't like them as people. I wouldn't hang out with them socially if it weren't for the business relationship. Although a point I'm going to make later on in this program is if you find that this is more than just a rare occurrence, you may want to think seriously about the work that you're doing and changing the mix of what you do. Not liking your clients as a general proposition is not the key to a successful business. In fact, quite the opposite. It's very often the first step in a pathway to disaster. We'll talk about that a little bit. But sometimes your clients aren't the nicest of people. Sometimes they are, SOB negotiators, whereas you yourself are not like that. You get into those situations where their style, their personality, their culture is just very different than yours. The third inconvenient truth is probably the most important. Every single client that you have is a potential plaintiff in a lawsuit. You should take this sentence, type it on a piece of paper, and put it above your computer, your laptop, wherever you will see it every day. Every client that you come across, even the nicest ones that you deal with, are a potential plaintiff in a lawsuit. If you make a mistake, if you foul up, if you miscommunicate, you could end up in court on the other end of this person. You always treat your clients, of course, as a lawyer, I'm overly sensitive to this perhaps. The only people that can sue me for malpractice or take my license away are my clients. I can be as aggressive, as obnoxious as I want to be dealing with the other side in a transaction or a negotiation because they cannot take away my license. They cannot sue me for malpractice unless I commit fraud, if I out and out lie to them. I mean, there are certain basic rules. But if a client is unhappy for any reason, they could sue me for malpractice. I didn't return my phone calls promptly enough. I didn't act quickly enough in a certain situation. This is what I spend my days worrying about. I don't worry about the other side. I worry about my clients. You have to treat them with kid gloves, and this is a problem that too many people in service businesses make. If you're too nice to them, they will walk all over you. Clients you want to serve your clients well. You want them to be happy, of course. You want to give them a positive business experience, but being too nice will get you killed. The clients will want everything for nothing. They'll want you to work 100 hours a week and only pay $100. No one can live like that. Clients can be greedy too, just like we all can be. So these are the four inconvenient truths about clients. Now let's talk about some ways to manage these inconvenient truths. First of all, ask yourself, what kind of clients do you want? When you're first starting out, the temptation is always to take anybody that walks in the door and has a pulse. And all right, maybe when you're first starting out, that's what you have to do. But it's not a viable long-term strategy. Sooner or later, you learn you can't. It's like that old Ricky Nelson song. You can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. It's a little bit like that. The song is called Garden Party, as I recall. You can't please everyone in the world. Your customers are not the universe, and everything that's out there. You've got to ask yourself, which clients are right for me? Who's a good fit for Cliff Ennico that may not be a good fit for other people? And these are the questions you ask yourself. What kind of people have bought you in the past? If you really want a sobering experience, go back and look at your high school yearbook. And not just to see how much time has passed since then. I mean, looking at your high school yearbook can actually be a very traumatic experience. I know people actually in my generation who have to be treated for PTSD after high school reunions. I mean, I just, but for many reasons. But seriously, go back at your high school yearbook and look at the people who signed your yearbook. I mean, if you were like everybody else, we all, had people sign our yearbooks and stuff like that. And some people would sign and some people would not sign in my yearbook. In my case, the people who did not sign my yearbook all had one very important thing in common. They were all known as cheerleaders. They wouldn't sign my yearbook. But look at the people who did sign your yearbook. You're going to find that they have things in common. Your friends in high school, the people you hung out with in high school and college, had more in common than you realized. They weren't just a random collection of individuals. There were certain people who bought you in the past, and there are certain people who didn't buy you in the past. And this is something that carries you throughout life. There's a famous a Midwestern punk rock group called Bowling for Soup that has a song out a few years ago called High School Never Ends. And it really is true. There are certain people who get you and there are certain people who don't get you. Give some time and think about who these people are who buy you, who shares your culture and worldview, who do you communicate well with. They may not look anything at all like you. At all. I mean, my client is a pretty eclectic mix. My clientele is a pretty eclectic mix of people. But they're not everybody. They're not random. They all tend to have very high levels of integrity. They also tend to be very colorful. I don't represent any dull people doing dull things. Everybody that I work with is doing something that's a little offbeat, a little interesting, and that kind of makes it fun. Probably says something about myself too. But they're not everybody. There's a certain type of client, when you're in business for a while, you realize there's a certain kind of client that gravitates towards you. Look for those people because it's much easier to sell to those people than it is to the mass of humanity. What image do you want to project to the world? I mean, what is your business all about? I mean, we used to say you can get rich selling BMWs. You can also get rich selling Yugos. Anybody here remember the Yugo? From the 1980s, it was this real basic box of a car that sold for a couple of $1,000s. It ran, but that was about the only thing you could say for it. You can make money. The point here is you can make money at the high end of a market. You can make money at a low end of a market, but you can't do both. A store that sells both Yugos and BMWs is going to confuse the heck out of your customers. Are you the low-cost provider? Is that your advantage? Are you the premier, gold-plated service? I mean, either way, you can win, but it's very hard to be both. What is your image? If you only deal with country club 1% people with net worths of $1 million or more, that's perfectly okay. But if the demographics in your community change and those people start moving out to other parts of the country, you may have to change your mix, and that's going to change people's perception of you. Your marketing, where I'm going with all of this, is your marketing needs to be targeted to the clients you want. Don't just throw stuff out there looking to attract anybody and everybody. So for example, if you look at my website at cliffennico.com, which is the website for my law practice, I got a bunch of them, but this is the one for my law practice, you'll see that my targeted client is a cost-effective, approachable lawyer for your small business. I'm not looking for big businesses. I'm not looking for people who, how can I say it, who are so rich that they could hire Cravath, Swain and Moore, one of the big Wall Street law firms. I'm looking for people who are concerned about cost-effective, approachable service, and that defines a lot of small business owners, but it doesn't define everybody. Watch your social media platform. People these days, when you market any kind of a business, the first thing they do is they check your LinkedIn profile, they check your Facebook profile. Make sure, I'm always very careful. It's like that famous Swedish vampire novel. I want to let the right ones in. I do not respond to every request to link in to people. I'm not that hungry to build a profile with 50,000 people because that's too many. People do judge you by the company you keep. A piece of advice that your great-grandmother gave you, which is just as valid today as it was 100 years ago, even in the world of social media, is people judge you by the company you keep. If I look at your LinkedIn profile and I see that your LinkedIn people are all over the place or they all look like yahoos, I'm going to think that you're a yahoo too. It's guilt by association. Be careful about your social media. People who look at my LinkedIn profile should be seeing people that I want to network with, and that's a reflection on me. There should only be, if you ever let your customers into your social media profiles, make sure that it's only customers that reflect who you are and who you want to you reflect. You want desirable clients, and regardless of your business, desirable clients have three things in common. They pay in time, they are cooperative, and they're easy to work with, and they will help you build your business via referrals. They will help you grow. These are three characteristics that every desirable client has. The clients you don't want, the undesirable clients, in my view, and this is just my opinion, are people who don't know what they're doing and have no money to pay you. Okay, any client that meets those two criteria is somebody you do not want to do business with. Sooner or later, they will get you into trouble. They will keep you awake at nights like anything else because they never pay you on time, and yet they demand the world, the earth, and the sun from you. That is something. And by the way, there are a lot of people like that out there. It's a very huge underserved demographic. If you run any kind of a business for any length of a time, you will meet people who don't know what they're doing and have no money, and you should not let them into your client base. The trick is to let only the right ones in the words of that Swedish vampire novel. Okay, here are some clients you don't want, people who don't know what they're doing and have no money. A huge underserved demographic, and rightly so. Here are some other clients you don't want. You don't want deadbeats, people who don't pay on time, or who have problems paying on time. You don't want pugilists. That's a fancy word for boxers. These are people who fight you every step of the way, and every conversation becomes a fight, a debate. You don't want that. You don't want phantoms. A phantom is somebody who gives you something to do and then disappears. You go and you try to contact them, and they don't return your phone calls. They don't return emails. You don't hear from them for 3 months until they want something done, and they want it done the very next day. There are clients that are like that. I call them submarine clients. They go underwater for a while, but all of a sudden they surface and they fire their torpedoes, and then they go back under again. I just don't like people like that. I have a problem. Time vampires, no explanation here. These are people who suck all the time out of your life. People that don't, that want so much of your time and, of course, can afford to pay for it. And the problem with time vampires, I find, they're very difficult to deal with because almost always they are very nice people. It's very hard to say no to the time vampires because they're nice people, you want to help them, and this is how they manipulate you. They manipulate you by being nice because they know that by being nice, you'll bend the rules for them. Maybe you'll take a risk that you probably shouldn't take for them because they're so nice. You want to help them out. Your sympathies are naturally attracted. A lot of nonprofit people in the nonprofit world are very good at this, and they can be time vampires. I don't serve on a lot of nonprofit boards, and it's not because I don't have a charitable impulse. I absolutely do for certain things, not everything. But I don't do them because they can be time vampires. These are such nice people, and I can't say no to them. And they're going to demand that I spend lots and lots of time without paying anything, and I'm afraid I'm going to let my practice suffer because I'm spending so much time with my nonprofit activities. So be careful. Anyone that wants you to sign on to a nonprofit board, be prepared to spend lots of time dealing with that situation. It's very hard to say no to time vampires. Do-it-yourselfers. In my world, they're a big problem. These are the people that want to do it themselves. They call you, and they only want to ask the one or two questions that they can't find answers to online. The minute I sense that a client is doing something on LegalZoom or some of the other online, LLC and corporation websites, my instinct is always to hang up on them. Or I don't hang up on them. I'll say, look, here's the deal. It's becoming clear to me that you really want to do this yourself. That's fine. Do it yourself, and if things don't work out, you're more than free to sue. I'll be happy to represent you in your lawsuit against LegalZoom if that's the case, if they make a mistake or do something like that. What I don't want is a situation where a client does it themselves. They ask me for advice on one or two pieces of it, but then when the disaster inevitably occurs, they blame me. They treat me as being responsible for the whole thing when I was only involved in that one small piece. Now, that's me. In your field, it may be different. You may find that you have to deal with do-it-yourselfers, but I personally don't like them. I feel as if you're doing it yourself, then you should be prepared to take the responsibility if you make a mess, if you make mistakes, and get yourself into trouble. I don't want to be held accountable for that. Litigators, these are people who love suing people. Anytime I deal with a litigious person, I want to get them out of my life. Now, don't get me wrong. If I was a litigator, of course, I would welcome this type of client, obviously. People who bring lawsuits because it's fun and they consider it a hobby can be a wonderful client for a litigator, but that's a terrible client for me. First of all, because I don't do litigation. I have to refer them to somebody else. But also, too, people who love to bring lawsuits sooner or later are going to sue you for something if they don't like you. That relationship's only going to last as long as they really, really like you. The minute they decide that they don't like you, they're going to be looking for a way to sue you or give you bad reviews on Yelp or some of the other online review sites. And these are people you don't want. People who love fighting battles are just, in my view, clients that just will give you headaches down the road. How do you spot these people? Well, believe it or not, your gut is often smarter than your brain. I mean, if you're an adult human being and if you've been around a while, you can tell when a client just smells off. The good news is that most of these people don't hide themselves very well. The vast majority of these people are blatantly obvious, and you only get in trouble with them if you don't listen to them. If you're listening to somebody and you come away saying, my God, this sounds like a real-time vampire situation, you are probably right about that. Trust your gut and develop ways to get rid of the clients that you sense fall into one of these client categories of clients that you don't want. My strategy, which I'll be happy to share with you, is whenever I find myself in a conversation with somebody that I think is a real wackadoodle, what I will very often say is, look, I really would love to help you out, but frankly, it's year-end. I got 3 M&A deals that have to close by year-end. I probably won't even be able to think about this until March, and I know that you need to get this done sooner. Let me refer you. There's another attorney in town. His name is so-and-so. Call him up. Here's his number. I know you'll have a good experience with him, and maybe I'll get you next time when I have a little bit more time. Now, who am I sending you to? I am sending you to my worst enemy in the local bar association. If I really think that you're a wackadoodle, I want you to be his client. Okay? And please don't hate me for that. But hey, all's fair in love and war, and this is not love. I sometimes like it when a truly wacky person calls me because, okay, now who do I want this person to work with? Who do I want to hurt today? This is my weapon of choice. This wackadoodle client is going to be the sword with which I kill my competition. Try not to hate me for that, but you get the idea. Okay. Okay, so now that's a little bit about who you want as clients, who you don't want as clients. Now let's get into some details here. Good contracts make good clients. You need some kind of a contract with every one of your clients and customers. Every one. And it doesn't have to be a formal 10-page document with witnesses and whereas clauses. This can be just an informal letter. It can be even an exchange of emails. Or maybe even text messages, although it's hard to save those for posterity. Every client every contract that you have with your client should contain at least these things: a detailed description of your services, what you're going to do, what you're not going to do. My standard retainer letter has a standard line where I say I don't do litigation, I don't do patent filings. There's 3 or 4 things I don't do for my clients, and I want those to be spelled out up front so that there's no miscommunication, so that my client if my client thinks at some point they need this down the road, we can bring this up front, and I can maybe send them to somebody else who's better positioned to help them out. It's a great way of screening out projects for which you're not qualified to do. We need some kind of language in there that discourages project creep. It is impossible to describe most projects in adequate detail at the very beginning. Sometimes you got to get into them before and start working on them for a while before you know truly what the scope of work is going to be. So there needs to be some language in there that says that if here's what I'm going to be doing. If we go beyond these parameters, then we need to revisit the contract, and I may have to revisit my fee quote, give you a different estimate, or something like that. So for example, whenever I'm negotiating a lease, I will often put language in the retainer letter that says that I anticipate it's going to be between X and Y hours, but if the other side's attorney proves to be unreasonable and wants to over-negotiate things, I will call you and we'll have to revisit this estimate. Projects have a nasty tendency of creeping out of control if you don't put language in your agreement that says, okay, that's fine, I'll allow it to creep a little bit, but beyond a certain point, I have the right to renegotiate my fee and to give you an updated estimate of what it's going to cost. Obviously, your client should spell out the fees you will charge. In my business, I always ask for an upfront retainer, and I'm increasingly asking for an early termination fee. Especially in M&A deals. I have been in situations where clients have paid me a substantial amount of money, and then 3 days later the deal dies, and they expect all their money back because of that. And I have to, and that's not really fair to me because in taking on this project, I deliberately said no to some other people. There's a certain opportunity cost involved. M&A work takes a lot of time and a lot of hours, and when I take on an M&A project, I'm anticipating that I'm not going to be able to take on a lot of other projects while I'm working on this thing. So increasingly now, I'm asking my clients to pay a certain portion as a non-refundable fee. So certainly if the transaction dies, I will total up the hours that I spend at X dollars an hour, but a certain portion of that is going to be non-refundable. I'm just doing that more and more myself. But if you're not in that kind of a business, then you shouldn't do that. But in my situation, I'm finding I need to do that more and more. The client should always have skin in the game, and that's what I'm trying to get at here. There should also be a certain amount of money that is at risk in the relationship. Okay. Here's the most important thing. When your fees are due and payable, I review a couple of hundred consulting agreements a year for consulting clients of mine. I work with a lot of consultants. And I will tell you something. You'd be amazed how many contracts, and some of these are based on very good forms that they got online somewhere. A lot of contracts are crystal clear about the services you're going to provide, how much you're going to charge, but they say absolutely nothing about when your fees are due and payable. If there's one thing your client contract needs to be crystal clear on, when do you get paid? When is payment due? Well, the payment will be due upon completion of the project or substantial completion. Oh, God. When is that? When is a project, any website designers out there? If there's any web designers on this call, you know darn well that project is never completed to the client's satisfaction. That language should never appear. That language should be banned from consulting contracts. Okay? Payment, net 30. That's great. I love it. Even net 45 is okay under certain circumstances. But there should always be a clause that says, unless we agree otherwise in writing, payment will be due within X days after submission of an invoice, period. That solves your problem. You should also include language on interest. Interest at 12% per annum will accrue past due payments. Believe it or not, under the laws of most states, consumer laws, especially if you're dealing with a consumer-type client, you are not allowed to charge interest on overdue debts unless you tell the client up front that you're going to do it. If that happens, believe it or not, if you don't, that's considered usury under state usury laws, charging excessive interest. It's a little legal quirk in our legal system. Every invoice that you send to a client, every contract should have a clause in there that says that interest at a penalty rate will accrue on past due payments. It should be boilerplate language in all of your contracts. A cooperation clause. This is a clause that says that the client must cooperate with you. The work that I do is not like a gumball machine where you put a nickel in and out comes a gumball. Okay, very often a client hires me and I have questions and I need to get back to them on, okay, well, when you say this, is it really this or you're really thinking about doing more of that? It's more of a dialogue, and it takes a while for me to get up to speed on some of this stuff. Remember the phantoms, the people that hire you and then disappear for 3 months? Okay, you need to have a clause in there that says that I expect cooperation from you. Calls will be returned promptly. You will respond to requests for information within X days. Otherwise, if things get really bad, then I have the right to terminate the contract, and I can also go on the non-refundable portion of your fee. At some point, the last thing in the world I want is a client hiring me in March when I usually have a lot of time on my hands, disappearing and then resurfacing again like a submarine in early December when I'm absolutely swamped and I got 50 people trying to want to get things done by year end. Excuse me. As my grandmother would have said, that means it's true. That's the last thing in the world I want. So a cooperation clause should be in most of your contracts. Sometimes the client will object to it, you'll take it out, but for most contracts it should be in there. Warranty disclaimers. Okay, I will do the work. I will do the work to the best of my professional ability in a professional manner, but I cannot guarantee that you will be happy. I cannot guarantee that your business will be successful, or that you will have a successful life. I will guarantee that I will not commit malpractice, but I will not guarantee that you're going to have a happy life. I simply cannot guarantee the future. Every contract should contain a clause of that nature because clients do expect sometimes that you're going to solve all their problems in life, and that's not the way that most of us work. I can form the best LLC in the world with the best operating agreement money can buy. There's still a chance you might still get sued. I cannot prevent you from getting sued. No lawyer can prevent you from getting sued. If you make a mistake and it's a bad enough one, you will get sued, and people will try to break through that LLC or corporation's walls. We call it piercing the corporate veil. No lawyer can say that will never happen to you. All I can do is do the work to the best of my ability and give you as strong an agreement as I can possibly give you in the real world. Caps on your liability. Limitation of liability clause. There should be a clause in there that says that even if you do screw up, even if you do make a horrible mistake, all you got to do is give the client their money back, and they can't do anything else. They can't sue you for anything else. They can't take your house away. There's a nice little clause, you'll see it in virtually every online contract, that says that you are not responsible for consequential, indirect, or incidental damages. That's a wonderful clause. If you can get that in your contract, it means that you are only responsible for damages that directly result from your negligence. You can't be sued for ripple effect things. So if you end up doing some software code for a client, and you accidentally put in a code that gets mixed up with something else, and it ends up leading to a nuclear explosion in North Korea, that is not your problem. I mean, you're only responsible for fixing the code mistake at that point. Now, that's an extreme example, of course, but that's what consequential damages means. It means ripple effect things that go out of control. You want to limit your liability as much as possible. Always put in an escape hatch that allows you to terminate the contract if your client turns out to be a jerk. My standard language is this contract may be terminated at any point by either party upon 10 business days' notice to each other. Always leave yourself an out just in case the client does turn out to be a jerk and you have to exit quickly. Okay, so now you got a contract with a client. How do you manage their expectations? Okay, rule number one, successful client handling is all about communication. Clients hate surprises, especially regarding fees. In my experience, I have very seldom had problems with clients who don't pay me. Now, partly that's because I'm a lawyer and people are afraid of me. But it goes beyond that. I mean, I do over-communicate what things are going to cost. When I send a bill out to a client, I send a 3-page bill with lots of detail. I want to remind the client exactly what I did, when I did it, and justifying how I came up to this final number. If I tell a client that something's going to be $1,000 and I submit a bill for $2,000, I now have an angry client. Most people are willing to pay reasonable fees for your services. What they don't want is a surprise. If you say something's going to be $1,000, then that's what the bill needs to be. If you go over a fee estimate, and that happens sometimes, the project was more complicated than you thought it was going to be, tell the client before you do the additional work. Don't wait until you've run up the bill and say, hey, by the way, I know I said it was going to be $1,000, but hey, we hit those snags. Remember those? It's going to be more like $5,000. That's going to create an angry client. Let them know in advance. Hey, by the way, just to let you know, this 100-page lease, okay, the fee that I quoted you, an average lease is 20 to 30 pages. This is a 100-page lease. It's going to cost a little more, and here's what I think it's going to cost. Tell them before and get the client to buy in. Also, always get the client's buy-in whenever you have to make a difficult decision, especially if the client isn't very clear on what they want. Years ago, I worked with a web designer. This is many, many years ago when I was first doing my website, and I told him what I wanted, what I dealt with, and I wasn't very clear at all. I frankly wanted to see what he was going to come up with, and he came up with something, and he showed it to me, and it was absolutely god-awful. It was totally the opposite of the image that I wanted to present. I don't want to get into a lot of details. It's a very possibility he may be on this call. I don't want to offend anybody here. But it was just, and now, and it made me question his judgment. I ended up saying, my God, I thought this guy was a great designer. He has a great reputation. This guy's an idiot. I mean, what the hell? No lawyer ever wants to go out with that kind of an image. What he should have done is not knowing exactly what I wanted, he should have sat down with me, showed me a bunch of different things, and sort of let me guide him. Well, okay, number 1 doesn't work for me, Joe, but somewhere between numbers 2 and 3, I think that's where we want to end up. If he had done that, I would have thought very highly of him. He gave me a range of options, and he's letting me tell him what I want rather than going with what he thought was right and guessing wrong. Okay? If you're not sure what a client wants, give them a range of options and let them guide you in the right direction. Okay? When a client refuses to follow your advice, get it in writing. Whenever a client disagrees with me, if I advise a client to go in a certain direction, no, Cliff, I think it's going to be okay, I always send it. This is where email can save your life. As you know, lawyers are not big fans of email. Email can get you in a lot of trouble sometimes. You do things without thinking and all that. But here's a situation where email can save your life. As a client management tool, whenever a client disagrees with me, I'll say, okay, but I always follow up with an email saying, hey, Joe, this is just to confirm. We talked about this. I did tell you there was this other option. You said you wanted me to go in this direction, right? Right. Print, when he answers, print it out the email, put it in a file folder, because if there's ever a problem with this client down the road, you will want to lay your hands on that email very quickly. And you don't want to go looking through your 10,000 files in your email folder to find it. You want that sucker right there so you can scan it, send it to him, and say, look, this is where you told me. See this email dated thus and such a date, thus and such a time. You told me you wanted me to do it this way. Now, I told you, there was going to be a problem there. Okay, well, sorry. Now let's try to fix it. Okay. Always return client calls and emails as promptly as possible. This is not always – you can't always do this perfectly. But one of the biggest complaints clients have is when you don't respond to their calls or emails. In part 1 of this video series, and in part 1 of this webinar series, where I talk about managing your time, I have a whole section on the protocols that I use in responding to client phone calls and client emails. If you can't find it on the SCORE site, it's posted to YouTube.com. If you search for Cliff Ennico and then search for time management, you'll see all of these webinars appear there as well. But first look at the SCORE site, which is fairfieldcountyscore.org, because all 3 parts of the time management program are there, and it's part 1 you want to listen to for that. It's okay to be friendly in your communications with your clients. Of course, you don't want to get into a situation where you're snarling at your clients, but you need to maintain a professional distance. Clients, don't ever allow your clients to become friends. Friends can do things that clients cannot do. They can impose on each other. They can borrow money from each other. They do stuff for each other for free. When a client starts thinking of themselves as a friend, they're going to start wanting to take advantage of me, and you want to keep that professional distance. If you find yourself getting too close emotionally to a client, especially romantically, consider referring them to another professional. It's very hard to separate a personal relationship from a business relationship. Hey, should you represent family members? Well, maybe so, but always think about what Thanksgiving is going to look like at your house if things don't go well. Okay, that's all I'm going to say there. Okay, when customers are dissatisfied, well, there's an old saying here, the customer is always right. Whenever you argue with a client, you ultimately lose regardless of the outcome. Even if you do get a settlement, this is a client that's probably not going to retain you in the future, and they're going to say they're going to question your judgment. They don't have the same high opinion of you that they did at the beginning, and there's nothing you can do about it. Don't cower and hide. Address the situation quickly, honestly, and offer to make things right. Have backup for anything you tell your client in support of your position, okay? Whenever you say, well, wait a minute now, there was this email, you told me specifically you wanted that, and that's why I did that, Joe. I mean, normally I wouldn't have done it, but you told me specifically that was part of your to-do list, and I want to make my clients happy. I'm sorry that led to a disaster, but you make sure you have backup for anything you tell your client. Well, wait a minute, I told you. Here's my email saying it was going to be an extra $500. Remember that, Joe? Consider a fee reduction. Do not charge for correcting a problem if it truly was your fault. That's so obvious, but a lot of people, lawyers are prohibited from charging for discussing a bill. If I'm discussing a bill with you, that is time I cannot charge you. Now, that works for lawyers. That's a mandatory rule of ethics for us, but it's a good best practice for any service business. But here's the key. Don't admit liability, especially in writing or in an email, without first consulting your lawyer. This is tricky. Let's face it, every once in a while you do make a mistake, okay? And you definitely want to correct the mistake. You're a professional. You want to do the right thing for your client. But being too quick to admit liability may get you into serious trouble. That becomes a smoking gun that the client can now use against you, and it's very hard to defend against a confession. Ask any criminal lawyer about that. It's very hard to get confessions overwritten, undone in court, in a court of law. Always talk to your lawyer before, because you may not be as much at fault as you think you are either. But you will forego those defenses, whatever they may be, if you're too quick to say, yeah, I really goofed, this is really my bad. Okay, so try to avoid doing that, as much as you possibly can without calling your lawyer first. Okay, if there's a problem with an invoice, deal with it before you send the invoice to the client. Again, I cannot stress this often enough. Clients detest surprise invoices. It's one of the surest ways to get a client angry at you. Okay, what do you do when a client posts a negative review online? This will happen to you. There's all these wonderful sites called Yelp.com. There's one actually for lawyers called Avvo.com, AVVO.com. Sooner or later, if you're a professional, somebody really is angry at you, but they're not confrontational enough to deal with it directly, they will post a negative review online. There's an old Spanish saying, revenge is a dish best served cold. Stay cool. Don't overreact. Wait 24 to 48 hours before preparing any kind of response. Okay? Calm down, then look very closely at the review. If the review demonstrates that the client is a raving lunatic, okay, the person is saying all kinds of crazy stuff, and it's very clear that none of this stuff happened, the best response may be no response at all. You may be dignifying his position by responding to it. If a negative review is written in such a way that the person is clearly out of his mind, the best thing in the world is not to respond. Otherwise, the best response, and you can copy these words if you wish, I'm sorry to hear you are not satisfied with my services. Please contact me offline and I'll do whatever I can to make things right. This does two things for you. Number one, it tells people looking at this review that the first time you knew he was unhappy is when you saw the review. Okay, that kind of puts the burden on him to prove that he's not a raving lunatic, because let's face it, people who post online reviews without discussing it with the person first are raving lunatics, as far as I'm concerned. By putting this message up, you're saying, wait a minute, I didn't even know you were unhappy, Joe. Call me. I'll do whatever I can to make things right. This makes you look good. Okay, you're a good person, and you're gonna get this thing right, whatever it takes. Do not get into an online argument with a reviewer or get overly defensive. Even if you're right, you will scare off potential new clients. I hate to say it. When people are looking to hire you, they look at the online reviews and they always look for the negative ones. No matter how many positive ones you have, they look for the negative ones. So how you respond to that is a key to the future success of your business. And then last but not least, and this is so obvious, I always do this, always ask satisfied clients to post positive reviews on social media. I will say, hey, listen, when a client really loves the work that I do and thinks that I'm great, I always say, look, can you do me a favor? Could you go out? There's a site called Avvo.com. It's a review site for lawyers. Could you please go online and just say some wonderful things about me? Just in case. I want people to see that I have satisfied clients. Now, don't disclose details of what I did, but just say wonderful things about me, because you want there to be lots of positive reviews so that if you do get an occasional negative, they'll be outweighed by all those wonderful 50 positive reviews that said things. Satisfied clients who said wonderful things about you. Billing strategies, we always do this. Bill early and often. Sounds like a joke, but it really isn't. Clients are much more likely to pay frequent small bills than a single massive one. I used to have a landscaper years ago that did this to me. I'd hire him in March. He would, mow my lawn, take care of my weeds, my bushes, everything like that. And I begged him every month, send me a bill. Send me a bill. I want to pay you. I'm flush. I got some money. I got a royalty check. I want to pay you. And the guy refused to do it because that wasn't in his wheelhouse. He wasn't good with the financial and bookkeeping side of things. What he did was he would wait until December And then a week before Christmas, he would send me a bill for the whole year, for the whole 9 months, like $15,000, payable upon receipt of the invoice. I mean, come on. Right before Christmas, he hit you with this 15th. And don't get me wrong, he was a good landscaper. He deserved it. I mean, he did good work. He deserved it. But I don't want to have to escrow money to pay my landscaper once a year. I don't want to have to do that. Normal clients don't do that. Seriously, bill early, bill often. Also, too, it's a great way to spot problems. If a client is not happy with the work, it tends to surface before it becomes an insurmountable problem. Always, always, always get some money up front. These are not your friends. These are not your relatives. You expect to be paid for your services. Always send detailed bills showing the client how much hard work you did for them. If you did spend too much time on a project, give the client a courtesy reduction and show it on the invoice. I always do this. Every once in a while I spend a little too much time on something. Rather than just eat it, though, I put it in the bill, but then I take it back at the end. Because that tells the client, hey, Cliff's a good guy. I was going to ask him about that. He did spend a little too much time on that one piece of the project, but he's admitting it. He's doing the right thing. I'm not going to question anything else in the bill. It's a great little billing. These are the secrets of the billing ninja masters here. Always make the client think that they're getting a little better deal than they're expecting, and they don't question all the other stuff that's wrong in your bill. I'm only kidding. I don't mean to say it like that, but it is true. It's a great little tactic. Especially with a client who's kind of borderline unhappy. Bill the most amount of time on the activities clients find the most distasteful. Whenever I send a bill out, drafting contract, 3 hours, I never get pushback. I always get paid. Bills for telephone conversations, maybe the client might question those. Do not spend lots of time billing for fun activities, because then the client gets really jealous of you, and you have a problem that way. He's having more fun than I am. Darn it! I mean, he's my lawyer. He's supposed to be miserable. That's what lawyers are. Also, by the way, for younger clients, always send bills by email and snail mail so they get them. A lot of people in the millennial and Gen X generation are not in the dead trees world. If it doesn't exist on their smartphone, it doesn't exist. Okay, we're going to wrap up real quickly. Here are some tactics for dealing with past due deadbeat clients. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I actually have a whole YouTube video called Dealing with Deadbeats, which is a whole 90-minute program on how to do it. These are some of the key things that I talk about there. But seriously, if you go to YouTube, search for me and search or just go to youtube.com and search for Dealing with Deadbeats, and you'll probably get the video that I've done. Firing a client, you sometimes have to do it. Sometimes clients are not worth having. If somebody is a repeat offender, they probably should be. You should get them out of your portfolio. Clients whose conduct suggests moral turpitude. This is a legal term. You can't really define it exactly, but you know what it is. If you suspect that a client is asking you to do things that are illegal or unethical or borderline, that's a client you really don't want to have for the long run. Clients you will not accept an invitation to LinkedIn from. Whenever I'm dealing with a client, one of the very first questions I ask is, would I want to link into this guy or to this person? If the answer is I'm not sure, that maybe is a client I shouldn't have. Clients you don't like. I said this before, and I'm going to say it again. Sooner or later, if you have a client you don't like, they become a very low priority in your life. You don't want it. They're so unpleasant to deal with that you put off dealing with them. You put off returning their phone calls and doing their work. You tend to put them at the bottom of their priority pile, and that's where problems can happen. That's where you start ignoring your client, you start giving bad service, and sooner or later you give them an excuse to come back at you with a lawsuit or a problem that is really your fault. If you find that there's a particular client that you just don't like, you don't respect them for whatever reason, get them out of your portfolio, because sooner or later you are going to start neglecting that client and you're going to give them an excuse, a problem, a pain in the neck. Always whenever you terminate a client, send a formal termination letter. I always do it by certified mail. I want to know that they got it. And of course, the letter should never come as a surprise. You should always call the client first and say, by the way, just to let you know, I'm getting rather busy on some other clients right now. I'm just finding that I'm not finding the time that I really need to do your particular service. Rather than let that become a problem, I think the best thing is for us to terminate our relationship. Here are 3 excellent referrals of other attorneys who will probably be able to give you better service than I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to give you if things continue. And don't be afraid to do that. Last but not least, if the client owes you money, hold on to their files and other deliverables until you receive payment, unless your lawyer tells you you can't. There are certain rules, especially for bookkeepers and accountants, on when they can and cannot hold their clients' files as collateral for an overdue payment. So if you are a professional, an architect, engineer, accountant, talk to your lawyer before doing this. But in most service businesses, you are not obligated to turn over their files or other work product until you get paid in full. So here's my summary. Don't try to be all things to all people. Trust your gut when taking on new clients. Get your contract language crystal clear. Communicate closely with your clients. Be friendly to your clients, but don't let them become friends. Bill early and often. Nip past due payments in the bud before they grow. And last but not least, don't be afraid to terminate problem clients. Even in a tough economy, there's plenty of work out there, and you should not feel yourself compelled to work for wackadoodles unless you are truly a masochist. Here are some of my best-selling books where I talk about some of this stuff in detail. The Small Business Survival book especially has some excellent stories about the clients from hell and how to deal with them. And then last but not least, this is my contact information. So with that, we are pretty much done with the scheduled portion of our program. Let's take some questions.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. We'll use the last 5 minutes here for some questions. And we do have a question, Cliff, it's on invoicing from Helen Grace. If you send the invoice by email and also copy in the regular mail, is there danger they may think they're sending a duplicate? How do you avoid that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually. Whenever I send a bill by email, I always include a cover note. I always attach it as a Word file or a PDF to an email. And what I say is, here is a copy of a bill that I will be sending you by mail in the next several days. So that way they know it's not a duplicate bill. Because, I mean, there are some clients, especially older clients, who will pay the email version, and I hate this too. A lot of law book companies do this. They enclose an invoice with the package. I pay off that, and then a week later I get an invoice for the exact same amount, and I got to call them and make sure I'm not being billed twice. So it's just a good practice. When you send it by email, just say, here is a copy of what I'm going to be sending you in the next couple of days. That way, when the client gets the snail mail, they know that it's not a duplicate bill. My concern with the younger folks is that if you just send a bill by snail mail, very often they don't look at their mail. For a long time, I mean, I actually had a client not too long ago. I sent him 3 invoices. None of them got paid. And I called him and said, is there a problem? Nice guy. I mean, very easy to work with, but, and the invoices were small. I said, what's the issue here? He goes, well, you never sent me an invoice. And I said, no, I've sent you 3 of them. And he goes, well, where did you send? I said, well, wait a minute. Is this your correct address? Yes. It was an apartment building in New York City. And I said, I sent them by regular mail. And I said, well, this is an apartment building. They don't deliver mail to apartments. And I said, dude, in your lobby, off the main corridor, is there a room with lots of little mailboxes in them? And he goes, it's dead silence, and he goes, is that what happens? The client did, and this is a guy in his early 20s. He did not know that mail was piling up in a mail room in the basement of his apartment. But there are people like that out there now. What can I tell you? With the younger generation, you got to get them, either with emails or with text messages. I don't send just snail mail now anymore. I have been enlightened as crazy stuff. Anyway, Bob, we have any other questions from the crew? Or
we just have a 1 or 2 minutes left here. If there are any last-minute questions, please submit them now. Otherwise, we'll wrap things up here. But we will maybe wait 30 seconds here if anyone has any last-minute questions.
The most important point that I think I want to make, your clients are your reason for being in business, but they're also not your friends. There's a very fine line you have to walk here between giving good customer service, which of course you have to do. You need to worship your customers. You do in any service business, especially in a service business. But if you're too nice to them, they're going to start walking all over you and taking advantage. And nothing burns your breakfast as much as a client who is starting to become a pain in the neck and who's starting to ask for unreasonable things. That is something that needs to be nipped in the bud, and you have to do it professionally, of course. You can't lose it and start yelling and screaming at the client, but at the same time, you have to get it done. You have to maintain that certain arm's length relationship, close but not too close. And it's something you do every day. It's something you deal with every new client that you take on. Even after 38 years of practicing law, this is something I still do every day of my life.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. That's all the time we have for questions. Just as a reminder, there will be a recording of this webinar and the slides, which will be available within the next day or two on our website, fairfieldcounty.score.org. Our next webinar will be next Tuesday. The topic is Navigating the Digital Marketing Maze with Susan Catalano and Robert Clark. So on behalf of SCORE, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And please fill out the evaluations that will be sent immediately after this. And in closing, big thank you to Cliff for presenting today, and have a nice day, everyone.